Hello, it's Martin back with the ID.3, and in today's video we will discuss everything there is to know about the driving assistance systems and specifically the adaptive cruise control on these vehicles. The same thing pretty much applies to other MEB cars like the ID.4, ID.5, the Cupra Born and the Škoda Enyaq. The important thing is that the VW cars, at least here in the UK, get all the functionality which I'm about to describe as standard. And it's not just your normal adaptive cruise control, because there are a couple of nuances which really elevate it compared to some other systems on the market. So regardless of whether you're just cross-shopping different cars and you want to learn more about these MEB products, or you already have one and you want to just get the maximum out of it, definitely stick around because there is a lot to explore. It will be quite an in-depth video, so if you're just looking for particular pieces of information, the timeline along the bottom will be divided into individual chapters, so you can skip along to the bits which interest you the most. Let's start with how you actually work this thing. So I will turn the vehicle on, the dash comes to life. To make it a bit easier for you to see what's happening, on the right side of the steering wheel I will use the view slider to enlarge the adaptive driving view display in the instrument cluster, and it will show us what the car is sensing on the road. And you may have noticed I haven't done anything else so far, and the adaptive cruise is already in the standby mode. This is quite an important nuance because with many German cars they default to having all of the systems off, and you will need to enable them at the beginning of each drive. However, with the ID.3 and I would assume the other MEB products, your last settings are remembered even between restarts. I will move on to the A2 here, which in typical London fashion is quite congested because of the roadworks going on for the Silvertown tunnel. So that will at least give us a good opportunity to really kind of push the system to the limit and see how it operates in practice. Because the idea with these adaptive cruise control systems is that you set the maximum speed you are willing to let the vehicle go to, and if it needs to slow down to maintain a safe gap to the traffic ahead, it will do so automatically. So to let it take control, I will just press the resume button, which will jump to the last memorized speed, which in this case is 50 miles per hour, which is the speed limit on this road. And as you can see, I haven't touched the pedals at all, but we are now following this VW Arteon ahead of us. And the system is very smoothly adjusting the power output to make sure that we are keeping a good distance ahead, and is happy to apply the brakes or regen in this case if needed to slow down a bit more aggressively. If you want to adjust the target speed, you can use the plus and minus buttons on the steering wheel. A light tap adjusts the speed in 1 mile per hour increments, but on these ID products you can also press harder and then it jumps in 5 miles per hour. Alternatively, if you prefer the swiping gestures, you can swipe up across the plus and minus and down to do the same thing, which is adjusting in 5 mile per hour increments. I will have a full dedicated video on all of these touch controls because there's lots to explore and they have a bit of a bad reputation, but in fact if you know how to use them, there's a lot of functionality and little tips and tricks to be unlocked, so make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss that. The other thing which you can naturally adjust is the following distance, because everybody has a little bit of a different preference on how close you want to be to the vehicle ahead of you. And you can do that by pressing the distance button on the left side of the steering wheel, and you can keep pressing that and it will cycle through different gap options. Alternatively, if you don't want to cycle through all the options, you can press the distance button once, and when the gap is highlighted in the instrument cluster, you can then use the plus and minus buttons respectively. After that menu times out, the plus and minus buttons go back to controlling your target speed. And as you can see, even though we are in this stop and go traffic, which can be quite tricky for some adaptive cruise control systems, the ID.3 is handling this super smoothly. If I had passengers in the back, they wouldn't be able to tell that it's the computer driving. It lifts off nice and smoothly. It doesn't leave too much of a gap, so people don't keep on cutting in front of you. And likewise, the last bit of stopping is also super smooth, where you can't really tell the transition from power onto brakes and then a complete stop, regardless of whether you're going up or down a hill. All very well tuned. Let's be honest, it's not a surprise that it's working quite reliably, because it's a tried and tested setup which I'm sure VW has been refining for years. If we look at the top of the windscreen, you can see that there is a single front-facing camera, and the data to that is supplemented by a front-facing radar. Now, back in the day, that used to live in the VW badge, but on these ID.3s, it's actually moved further down in the front bumper in this dedicated panel area. Now, you may occasionally get a warning saying that the radar is obstructed. In that case, you just need to make sure that all of this is clean, because especially in winter, you can get quite a bit of ice and snow buildup on top of the number plate plinth. So you just need to wipe that off and you should get your adaptive cruise functionality back without any trouble. But you know how a normal adaptive cruise control system works, so let's explore all the other features which are implemented on these MEB products. So disclaimer, I've got basically all of the smart stuff turned on. So the cruise control will try to do as much of the driving as possible. And I'm using the built-in sat-nav system for the routing information, so it has the best chance of actually knowing what to do next. I'm joining the A13 here, and as you can see, because this is a 40 mph road, the cruise control automatically knows to set the default speed to 40. But as we pass this 30 signs, it switches to 30. And by the way, also observe how it recognizes that that's a curb and that's a solid line now. So I will just click resume for it to take over the current speed limit, and we will see how it does. Because with the speed limit preview enabled, it should automatically change the speed limit based on the speed limit of the road. But this is quite a tricky route for many systems, because there is a lot of neighboring kind of local streets where the speed limit differs and the speed limit recognition often picks that up incorrectly. So now we are doing 30 mph like we should. I mean, it is dreadfully slow, but that's the speed limit at this beginning section of the A13. And now it's turning into a 50. So as soon as we pass the 50 gate, the car will have recognized it and we have accelerated to 50 mph. Now, I haven't needed to do anything. I will intentionally put myself into the left lane here, because look, that's, for example, an example of a 30 mph sign, but that's only for the local traffic. However, it seems like the ID.3 has recognized this correctly and it has not slammed on the brakes. It's still pinned at 50 mph. Let's see, there is one more junction here. And you see that 30 mph, it's not very obvious whether that applies to us or to the neighboring street, to some automated systems, but so far we are doing well. No false positives. Let's see, now this is even trickier one, because it's a 30 mph sign, but it doesn't say local traffic. Will the car freak out? Ah, it did. So you can press set at any point and it will cancel the speed adaptation. But now I have to, it realized that we are in a 50 zone, I can click resume and it will take back over to doing 50 mph. So this is still a shame. The way the system works is that it uses both the cameras and the mapping data, but you have to appreciate in certain scenarios the camera has to take priority, because if there are, for example, temporary traffic signs for a construction zone, the car still should be able to slow down on its own without flying through at what the GPS data says. So I do think at the end of the day we should come up with a clearer way of all of this signage situation, because if you don't know the area, it can actually be sometimes confusing even for human drivers. Now it's telling me to stay in the right lane, both in the sat-nav and I can see it on the ID light, but I will ignore it, because let's try to go on to the M11. Even as the sat-nav recalculates, the adaptive cruise control does not freak out unnecessarily, and as soon as I move into the passing lane, it smoothly accelerates. It's very good with the pedal inputs. That's one of the positives of the ID.3. I will try to test it out in some more scenarios so you can see what I mean, but it's very, very smooth. It's like a professional driver, no jerky movements at all. Another 30 mph sign on the side of the road, but a 50 on the right side, and it's pinned at 50 mph like it should be. Excellent. Now I need to be in the two rightmost lanes. So if I indicate, it will nicely tuck in behind this Prius, and even though it was quite close, it didn't freak out by slamming on the brakes unnecessarily. By the way, in a situation like this, if I wanted to go a little bit quicker, because obviously 50 mph, that's just the indicated speed, so let's say that I want to bump it up to 52, I can do that, and the car will remember the new set speed, even if you pass a reminder set of speed limit signs until the speed limit actually changes. So you do not have to manually adjust it every time you pass a 50 mph sign in this case. So for example, you see on the right here, you've got a 50 sign, but the cruise control stays set to 52 mph. Likewise, another example, 50 mph sign on the left, but the car still keeps my speed preference. So if you like to drive on motorways at, for example, 70 miles per hour GPS speed, you can still do that. The system is not too intrusive. This is now officially turning into the motorway, the M11. I can see the speed limit sign ahead, showing that we are going to jump to 70 miles per hour, which is the national speed limit. As soon as we pass that speed gate, 70 miles per hour is detected, and we are smoothly accelerating to 70 miles per hour. But now, as a good driver, I'm in the leftmost lane, like everybody should be, unless they are passing. But this will present a challenge very shortly, because we are gaining on this vehicle in the middle lane. When that happens, to prevent undertaking, you will see that vehicle is depicted in the visualization, in the instrument cluster. And even when we have a vehicle to the side, the ID.3 not only does it keep a safe distance to the vehicle ahead, but it also will make sure to not undertake a slower moving vehicle to your right. The moment I put the indicator on, the power was applied instantly. Like for example, now we are doing 66, slowing down. The moment I put the indicator on, power is applied, as you can see by the power meter. The car doesn't wait for you to fully move into the next lane. It starts applying power the moment you put the indicator on, to act again like a good driver would, to merge with the speed of traffic in the passing lanes. That's a nice EV9, fresh on a 73 plate. Even when the vehicles here change lanes quite far in advance, the ID.3 adjusts the speed very smoothly. You can just tell that this system has been refined over generations, because while it doesn't have as many flashy features as Tesla's full self-driving, for example, the core functionality just works very well in practice. I don't understand why we are not moving any quicker, but well, we have a Prius driver ahead of us, so that's what you get. At any point, if you want to accelerate quicker, you can always just give the accelerator pedal a little nudge, and the car will start accelerating. And then the moment you let go, it takes over, as is indicated by the green cruise control symbol. I think that's enough of this motorway driving. You can see it works like you would expect it to. So to make things a little bit interesting, we will push the system to the limit on some country roads. By the way, you also see on the visualization that the system is capable of detecting different vehicle types. But enough of that, we are taking the exit towards Harlow. The sat-nav system is very sophisticated. It tells you exactly which lane to be in, and it knows which lane you are actually in as well. So when I take the off-ramp here, it will show me in the correct lane. And now it knows that there is a bend ahead, and it should automatically start slowing down to 31 miles per hour. So you see it's slowing down for the roundabout. Obviously it doesn't detect red lights, so I will take over here by pressing the brake pedal. This feature is called the route layout preview, which doesn't only change the speed depending on the speed limit, but also the road layout, as the name suggests, ahead. So for example, any intersections, roundabouts, and the curvature in the bends. So I'm enabling adaptive cruise again. We have got green lights ahead, so that's all good, and we are following this X3 ahead of us. It has detected a 60 mile per hour sign, and is doing very well so far. These bends have been quite gentle so far. We have stopped traffic ahead, and it slows down well with enough of a gap. Sometimes adaptive cruise control systems don't like rapid changes in speed, and they can only adapt to small differences, but this was done quite well. I will keep my eye out on the rear view mirror to make sure that I do not get rear-ended. And it's also saying that the cruise control is ready to start, and because we started moving within a couple of seconds, I didn't have to confirm anything. The car just started moving on its own. Based on the GPS data, it also knows that there is a 30 mile per hour section ahead, which is here, and it also knows about the roundabout. You see, so like now, it knows that this is roundabout. It slowly kind of inches forward. The roundabout is lit up green, and when we get out of the roundabout, it starts accelerating on its own. It wouldn't come to a complete stop anyways, and it wouldn't check for cross traffic because it doesn't have any side cameras like Teslas do. So it would just probably come down to about 20 miles per hour based on my experience, and then let you decide whether you need to apply the brake to yield to any oncoming traffic, or it will just roll through and then start accelerating as you are out of the roundabout. And even these kind of sharper bends, it still lets you take them at decent speeds. So it only really slows down for the very sharp curves. Now it knows that it's turning into a 30 ahead as we are entering the village. So we are initially just coasting to make sure that, we do not slow down the traffic unnecessarily early, but the closer we get to the speed limit, the more regen is applied. And now we are doing exactly 30. Let's see how long until I get beeped at, because this is unusually slow for most people driving in this part of the country. And we are taking the third exit at the roundabout. Roundabout is ahead, and it's now lit up in green on the right here. So you see the car kind of slows down, but I need to make sure that it's actually clear to go ahead, and it is indeed the case. It is maintaining a comfortable speed here of 22 miles per hour to make sure that my passengers don't get sick, and it smoothly starts accelerating as I'm getting out of the roundabout. Perfectly done again. Let's see whether it freaks out about these parked cars. This occasionally confuses adaptive cruise control systems, but no, it knows that we are at this section of the road, and because the adaptive cruise control is taking care of the speed regulation, I don't have to worry about cameras. But keep in mind, as you have seen, it's not always 100% perfect, so you are still responsible for obeying traffic laws. So it momentarily hesitated with the brakes because that car was very much in our lane, but the moment it detected the steering input, which would indicate that we are going to move around it, it let go and it just went past without any trouble. This is actually the challenge which I think will be for these self-driving cars in these UK rural villages, and it's the fact that there's a lot of vehicles and kind of street furniture almost directly in the road. So how will they be able to differentiate whether to slow down for them, whether to go past them, etc. You see bend ahead, so now we are slowing down to just 28 just to make sure that I don't overshoot it here. And we are going to be taking the first exit at this roundabout. So let's make sure that we are clear. Yes, we are. It got confused about a pedestrian. This is a scenario of the false positives which can happen, but it didn't slam on the brakes. It realized he was on the sidewalk. Now slowing down to 25 to take this curve without going into the ditch. And let's see, 60 miles per hour detected, and we are accelerating up to the national speed limit for these country roads. It knows that there's a 30 ahead, but it did this incorrectly, so it got confused by this type of speed limit sign, which we have in the UK. The bars just mean how far ahead the 30 is, but it started slowing down way too early. It thought that that was actually a 30 mile per hour zone, whereas it's only here when we cross this final sign, that's where it should be at 30 miles per hour. If you've been watching up until now and thought, wait a second, I've seen this guy demonstrate basically these exact same features somewhere before, well, that's because the Porsche's IQ.Drive system, which I covered for Wisely Automotive, I will make sure that that is linked in the top right hand corner in a card, is basically the same thing. And I'm sure that under the hood they are the same system, because after all, Porsche is part of the VW group. However, the big difference is that on the Porsche you need to first specify the adaptive cruise control and then the IQ.Drive package if you want to get the full functionality with the automatic speed adaptation and so on. Whereas with the ID.3, 4 and 5, at least in the UK, is included as standard, even as part of the base level life trim. So you get a lot of value for money, and to be fair, it's the way it should be in my eyes. It already has the radar on board anyways, so why not just implement all the features and make it a more enticing deal for the customer. Now this car is going to be turning left. Let's see, how does it handle this situation, because this is quite tricky. So we are still slowing down, and now we have realized that there's nobody ahead of us and we are accelerating. So it did hold the brakes for maybe 1 to 2 seconds, a bit too long. If you are a human driver, you know that as that car is turning away, the road ahead will be clear. But these adaptive cruise control systems, they have to be very cautious in order not to crash into things randomly. So fair enough, that's the state of the technology in this day and age. I'm sure it will improve as time goes on. Yeah, I don't know what much to say, because it's just doing everything very well. It's fascinating to obviously watch it do its thing. You still have to be paying attention to the road, but yeah, it's very, very good. And I know some people will say that, you know, they want to drive themselves. Fair enough, So do I, especially on kind of twisty country roads. But there are scenarios where I do not want to drive myself, for example, in traffic jams, or if I'm just doing a long motorway run. And in those scenarios, these adaptive cruise control systems, especially the modern ones, which are so full-featured, are a great help, because it really does alleviate a lot of the kind of manual labor of driving. And for example, this roundabout is not mapped, and you see that's an example of it just using the GPS data and not actually understanding the yield sign. So through these ones, it would have just flown through. So you definitely need to be paying attention. And if you want to use this functionality to its max, make sure that your built-in VW maps are up to date as well. We're just slightly reducing speed for this curve. The curvature of the road is also not detected by the camera either, so it's using the GPS data and the route data from the navigation system to figure out where we are and how it needs to adapt the speed to the road ahead. And it's very good, because if you're on unfamiliar roads, for efficiency driving, it will slow down at the right moment, so you don't have to slam on the brakes and waste energy unnecessarily, even though these ID.3s do have that eco assistance thing. But you obviously with that need to be paying attention to the instrument cluster all the time if yours doesn't have a head-up display like this particular example. It also recognizes normal junctions, not just roundabouts ahead. So now we are slowing down because it knows that we will have to turn right here. But we have got oncoming vehicles, so I had to apply the brake on my own. I appreciate many people will not want to use the built-in sat-nav system, but instead use CarPlay with their preferred mapping app of choice. So I've done just that. I'm using Apple Maps now, and even then when I turn on the adaptive cruise, you will see that obviously the car at this point doesn't know which junctions and exits I'm taking, but it will assume that we are still continuing on the road we are on, and it will adjust the speed accordingly. It knows that the speed limit on this stretch of the road is 50 miles per hour because it is using its own database in the background. And when the vehicle detects the respective speed limit signs, the target speed is adjusted accordingly. So you don't really sacrifice much of the functionality, even if you like to use third-party navigation apps. So far we have obviously only been discussing the adaptive cruise control, but you also do have a speed limiter. And I know it's not very exciting, but people keep asking about this during our i3 handovers. So here we go. You select the speed limiter by pressing on the mode button and then swiping across to the speed limiter tab. And you see now we are in the limiter mode instead of adaptive cruise. And to set it, you just press the resume button just like with adaptive cruise, and it will automatically set to the speed limit. This is actually off by default, so you need to go into the settings. I will show you exactly how that works, and you can adjust it there to automatically match the speed limit which is detected by the camera and the GPS database, just like with the adaptive cruise. And what happens now is that I can accelerate smoothly, but the car will not let me go past 70 miles per hour unless I absolutely floor the accelerator pedal. So for example, if you need to quickly merge onto a motorway or do an emergency overtake, if I floor the pedal into the kind of last D10 position like a kickdown function in a normal automatic, you get a beep and then the car temporarily lets you exceed the speed limiter. Once you drop down below the set speed, it will again go back into the default mode where it keeps you under the set target. The nice thing is that you still get the preview of the speed limits ahead. So it knows that we have got a 50 coming up, and it is gradually slowing me down to make sure that I pass the gate at 50 miles per hour, and I haven't needed to do anything. Unfortunately, there is no way to set up an offset. So if you want the limiter to be 10% over the speed limit, you will always have to use the plus and minus buttons to manually adjust the target level every time the speed limit changes. But for all of you who do not want to worry about speeding tickets, yet you still want to be in charge of the driving, not the adaptive cruise control system, this is a very good option. And even when you revert back to the adaptive cruise control again, the car remembers your previous stored settings for the distance and the intelligent speed regulation and so on. So it's very easy to swap between what you prefer in which driving scenario. So I think we covered all the bases when it comes to adaptive cruise control, but what about the travel assist system? Well, I'm afraid it's quite a rare option here on these UK spec cars. The way to know that it definitely comes with it is that on this left hand side of the steering wheel, once the vehicle is fully powered up, there is a dedicated symbol here depicting a vehicle in between lane markings. Because that's the purpose of the system. It's basically one tier higher up in terms of driving assistance than just the adaptive cruise control on its own, where it actively tries to maintain the middle of the lane. You may have seen that as I was driving on some of the country roads, the lane keeping assistant kicked in, but that's different because that only intervenes if you're about to touch the lane marking, whereas with the travel assist and lane centering, it does actively trying to maintain the middle of the lane at all times, even in steeper curves, instead of kind of ping-ponging you from side to side. And it also bundles in the assisted lane changes. So when you turn the indicator on, the car automatically moves into the corresponding lane if the conditions allow on motorways, for example. As mentioned, it's not on this particular example, and it's very unlikely to be retrofittable because it actually requires some additional hardware, namely a capacitive steering wheel to detect the presence of your hands on the actual wheel to make sure that you are paying attention to the road, and also the blind spot monitoring radars, which then enable the automated lane change functionality. If it's an absolute must-have for you, I'm afraid you will do a little bit of homework, because VW reshuffled the model lineup with the trim levels like a million times here in the UK. But off the top of my head, you will need to look for a Tech or a Max trim if you want the middle 58 kWh battery, or I think it's actually bundled in as standard on the Tour models, which have the bigger 77 kWh pack. Lastly, I promised I would take you through all of the options and the menus. So to access all the driving assistance settings, you just press this Assist Touch button and it brings you into this screen. Now you can press on any of the items here, but it's going to be a little bit confusing if you're new to the system. So you can also toggle to a list view and then you get a more standard menu structure. Let's start from the top with the adaptive cruise control system. This is where you can decide whether you want the vehicle to memorize the last distance you had selected or whether you prefer a default distance. And this is where you can also enable some of the additional functionality. As I've shown in the previous chapters of the video, the road layout preview slows down for roundabouts and intersections, and also for steep curves on country roads, for example. The speed limit preview is the automatic adjustment of the target speed based on the current speed limit detected on the road you are driving on. One thing which I didn't have a chance to test out is the end of queue preview, and this actually may be off by default. It relies on the vehicle to X communication, and if the system determines that there is a traffic jam on a motorway ahead of you, it will start slowing down preemptively even if the road ahead appears clear to the camera and the radar system. It's a fantastic idea because obviously you do not want to come flying into a wall of traffic. To enable it, you first need to go into the users menu and into settings with your user profile selected, privacy settings, and then you need to enable the vehicle to X technology. And it's almost like Waze crowdsourcing data to inform other road users about the road conditions, etc. Only then can you go back to assist and it will actually let you enable the respective feature in the adaptive cruise control menu. Anyways, that's adaptive cruise covered. Speed limiter, as I mentioned, by default is enabled to be just a dumb speed limiter. So if you wanted to automatically adjust the speed limits, you need to enable the speed limit preview separately from the adaptive cruise control right there. I've been using it throughout London, and unlike the adaptive cruise, which seems to be happy to slow down to speed limits as slow as 20 miles per hour, the speed limiter automatic adjustment only seems to work down to 30 miles per hour, so something to keep in mind. Next up, you've got lane assist, which you can directly enable or disable right here, or you can go into the sub-menu and really customize how it behaves. You also get the dynamic roadside display. The car already by default shows you the speed limit in the instrument cluster, but if you also want to get a warning, you can customize that here. Going back out, there is the driver alert system. On these ID.3s, there is no driver monitoring camera, so the system is just using the steering wheel inputs and the pedal inputs to determine whether you are staying alert. And despite there being a sub-menu arrow, there's actually nothing else to customize, at least for now. Eco Assistance is the system where it pops up with the suggestions when to take your foot off the accelerator pedal to start slowing down early to be efficient. Nothing to customize in Eco of assistance either, and the last option is the front assist, which is basically the autonomous emergency braking in the front of the vehicle. There is a master switch here to turn it off in case you want to. For example, if the weather conditions are bad and it keeps going off, you will get a warning message in the instrument cluster, and I'm afraid it will re-enable every time you restart the vehicle. It's just considered as one of those mandatory safety features these days, so that is what it is. However, you can still customize how early or late it warns you, or whether it warns you at all. You can customize whether you want to get the warnings about you being too close to the vehicle ahead of you, and it can also automatically help you swerve if you are coming up too quickly to a stationary vehicle but there is some space next to you, etc. However, all I can say is don't be too worried about it, because, for example, unlike the Tesla system, which can be quite yappy and annoying if someone, for example, steps out in front of you, which happens all the time in London, during the time I had the car so far, which has been a few weeks and I've been driving it almost on a daily basis to test out all the features in practice, I've only had that single false positive, which I captured earlier in this video when it detected the pedestrian on the sidewalk, and even then it only gave an audible warning. I never had it slam on the brakes unnecessarily. Which brings me on to the conclusion. Overall, I really like the system. Firstly, I love that there's lots of features, they are well implemented. The basics of the adaptive cruise control are done right in a sense that it all adapts very smoothly to the traffic on the road. And most importantly, it's actually all included in the standard equipment. On the negative side of things, I do need to mention that it's a bit of a shame that travel assist is so rare on these European spec vehicles. I would at least love to see the option to software unlock, even for a payment, the functionality of the lane centering to help out on longer trips. I've also experienced right after collection that the system tends to brake quite late if vehicles cut in front of you. On one hand, it's a good thing because it means that it really doesn't struggle with phantom braking like some more sensitive systems, but on the other hand, you really need to remain alert, and there are quite a few scenarios where you will have to touch the brake pedal or disable the system manually to give someone enough space to safely merge in front of you. Lastly, I think that it's a little bit of a shame that there is no way to set up a default speed limit offset, because this way you can either have the car strictly adhere to speed limits, or you will have to do all the work manually yourself. I know what the first world problem, but I know some people like to drive at, for example, 5 or 10% over the speed limit, at least on the speedo. But if you are one of those people, you will always have to adjust the target speed manually. And I think that's about it. If you made it this far in the video and you appreciate the effort which went into it and it hopefully answered your questions, make sure you hit the like button. If it didn't answer your question, feel free to leave one in the comments below and I will try my best to get back to you. Otherwise, again, thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.